He's gonna take you back to the past to play some, well, maybe not so shitty games that suck ass. Having made videos on classic video games for over 20 years, and now having 3 retro-inspired games under his belt, the Angry Video Game Nerd really has been taking us back to the past. That's right, the 3rd installment of the retro-style, hard-as-balls platformer, based on the Angry Video Game Nerd, has been released. And the question is it good, or does it suck ass? Let's dive in and find out. So, for those of you who click, who may not know who the Angry Video Game Nerd is, and I'd make a joke about living under a rock, but I imagine you have a life and actually go outside and whatnot, but since the mid-2000s, James Rolfe has made videos online where he puts on a persona of a nerd who happens to be quite angry, and rightfully so, as he revisits games from his childhood that oftentimes were very difficult, and in many instances, not very polished either. And as someone pointed out on YouTube, us looking back at the nerd's early episodes is the same amount of time as the early episodes looking back at the games from his childhood. I didn't want to correct him and say that more time has passed now between the early AVGN episodes to now than the retro games to the early AVGN episodes. And as someone who is only a few years younger than the nerd, I felt that. In my back. A few years ago, he released not 1, but 2 retro-inspired video games, in the form of action platformers, with the 3rd title released just earlier this year. I have played and finished the previous 2 games, and I did quite enjoy them. I've not only been watching the Angry Video Game Nerd since basically when it began, but I also grew up with the same games the nerd, James Rolfe, did as well. And it was somewhat refreshing to find out that it wasn't just me who found Castlevania 2 so cryptic and confusing, and I felt somewhat validated when he too thought that Bart vs. the Space Mutants wasn't all that it was cracked up to be. Granted, a lot of his persona is exaggerated to push his comedy further, as James Rolfe himself is not actually like the nerd. Bugs Bunny's birthday blowout was no Mario, but it also wasn't as bad as Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, for instance. But with all that in mind, is the new game of his worth checking out? Well, to paraphrase the nerd, let's pop this sucker in. Yeah, I'm gonna try and keep the coarse language to a minimum.
Bullshit.
In fact, I have a list of potential creative cursing I could say, and I'm going to limit myself to 1 F-bomb for this video, which I'll be tactically using for the most appropriate and most comedic timing, so I better not fuck this up. Damn it! Anyway, one of the awesome things about this installment is that it was not only made to run on NES hardware, but you can actually purchase it for the NES. It was kinda wild seeing a new game in 2025, available on Steam, the Switch, and the Nintendo Entertainment System. I understand that there are games still being made on older hardware, but it still put a smile on my face. Having said that though, I did get the Steam version, and decided to give it a whirl. Once the game boots up to the title screen, you are greeted with an 8-bit rendition of the AVGN theme, complete with a bit-crushed voice sample of the nerd yelling out his favorite animal. The music sounds great, and is a taste of what's in store. From here, you can edit the display and other settings, including adding a classic CRT filter. Unlike the NES, however, we are greeted with cutscenes, which sets up the story of the game, but also acts and feels like you're watching a nerd episode.
Top-notch live-action cutscenes throughout that make it feel like you're playing an actual episode of the show.
Hey, he's right. Now, I'm more than certain that this isn't on the NES version, unless it's maybe replaced by 8-bit cutscenes with text, like in the previous nerd games. After many shits and asses, we are greeted by the stage select screen that looks straight out of Mega Man. You can also press on the nerd to make him say ass, and you can even make a sick remix. Ah yeah. Once you select your stage and boss, which are references to the show and pop culture in general, you're on your way to kick some ass. I really should put an ass counter in the top corner. As we drop into a stage, we are immediately greeted by the thumping soundtrack and the very nice visuals. I think the nerd looks great in true 8-bit. I read some comments that mentioned that they weren't too happy with how the visuals turned out, but I honestly think this looks very neat. especially knowing that it has the NES in mind. The previous games looked technically more 16-bit than 8-bit, or maybe it was 24-bit, like the Neo Geo or something. Does 24-bit even exist? Half-bit? Quarter-bit? The Risk game? Anyway, in the true nature of 2D action platformers, the story is secondary, and the gameplay is the most important, and the jumping and shooting feels pretty good. You even get to do a slide like in Mega Man 3. There are even multiple paths that you can take throughout each stage, some parts feeling a little shorter and easier, but yielding less rewards, so there is a bit of exploration that you can do. Throughout the stages, you can pick up power-ups and weapon upgrades, which power up your main gun, similar to games like Blaster Master. If you fully charge your zapper and have the Super Scope power up on top of that, you can absolutely blitz enemies, and even bosses. When you get hit, however, you drop your weapon upgrades, but you can pick them back up before they disappear, to make sure you don't completely lose your upgrade. In hard mode, however, you don't even drop any weapon parts when you get hit. You simply just lose your power-ups, so keep that in mind when going balls deep in hard mode. You can also find some special power-ups that allow you to get a few uses in some instances, like the beer bottles that you can throw at enemies in an arc, similar to the axes in Castlevania. An F-bomb that clears most of the screen with a big, loud, explosive expletive, and the middle finger, which pisses the nerd off in such a fit of rage that he's too pissed off to take any damage. Out of my way, turd munchers. Speaking of getting pissed, each time you start a stage or checkpoint, it says, "Get pissed." Yeah, it reminds me of Wolfenstein 3D's Get Psyched. Oh yeah, I'm gonna get pissed alright. Both kinds, angry and drunk. There's a third option, oh my. If you happen to die enough times that you're on your last life, you'll get assistance from a familiar turd-covered pickle. When you activate Shit Pickle, for those unfamiliar with the Angry Video Game Nerd, yeah, that's the character's actual name. He'll attack other enemies on screen, similarly to Beat the Bird from the Mega Man games, and will also often retrieve items out of thin air and give them to you. The ability lasts until you move on to the next screen. But beware, because his presence is completely absent in hard as balls mode. Yeah, we'll get to that soon. When we get to the bosses, it was one of those moments where at first, I thought the bosses were a shitload of piss, as they seemed significantly harder than the stages, on normal difficulty at least, until I very quickly learned their patterns and realized that they actually weren't so hard after all. Don't get me wrong, they are still quite challenging, but once you learn their patterns, it's all muscle memory. Yeah, take that Pepsi, man. I always preferred Coke anyway. The overall difficulty unsurprisingly becomes quite hard on hard mode, to the point where I was actually giving a celebratory middle finger to my screen when I finally beat a boss in hard mode, but we'll come back to that later. But if we're talking about annoying enemies, then I gotta bring up these damn mosquitoes. Sorry, shit flies. They only appear in 2 levels, the main one being the TP stage. It's like E.T., only toilet paper, because the stage is the Turbo Tunnel instead of the Turbo Tunnel from Battletoads, only it's full of shit. Yeah, when I explain it, it's not as funny as just seeing it. But these flying shitheads were the bane of my existence during this turd-covered stage, so much so that the boss felt fairly easy in comparison. Come on, come on, come on, I'd rather eat a mummified cat turd than play this monkey diarrhea game. Jokes aside, I actually think the difficulty is quite fair, for the most part. It has its moments, but at least it's not Battletoads level of bullshit. Every now and then you'll find a mini-boss, usually before a checkpoint. This sentient poo reminds me a bit of a mini-boss from the Mega Man games. Also, once you beat all 6 stages, you can then play the final stage. Kinda like the Dr. Wily stages in Mega Man. Wow, this game really is like Mega Man. Only there's one long stage instead. But with a lot of these types of games, sometimes you gotta use everything at your disposal, including some potential exploits, which segues into the next segment. And now, GamerDre presents GamerDre's retro tips and tricks. What accent is this? If you're ever facing unmentionable creatures blocking your path and just being unfathomably annoying assholes, if you walk to the left so they are no longer on the screen, there is a good chance you can despawn them. This will save you from having to deal with them, for a while at least. When you enter a new stage but start with 0 lives remaining, rather than getting through most of the stage, only to die and have to restart the level, there is an easy way to get all of your lives again. Ignore the fecal-covered vegetable. To get all of your lives again, simply perform a tactical sui, plummeting to your demise, but restarting with all of your lives again. Warning, do not try this in real life. It doesn't work. Rest in peace, Dave. You will be missed. And finally, when all else fails, don't ignore the fecal-covered vegetable. Use all of your power-ups before you see the final credits, and use as many exploits as you can. It's not cheating, it's playing smart. Don't know what the hell that was about. Alright, so let's talk about what I like most about this game. To start off, and I think this is the most important, is the game feels good. The jumping feels tight, and the shooting feels fun and familiar. There are very few moments or segments that feel like it wasn't your fault for screwing up. But overall, it feels like how an action platformer should, with tight controls and a familiarity that feels at home, like Mega Man or Contra. The visuals also look really nice, looking at times like they're pushing the NES color palette, and the nerd himself looks great in 8-bit. Graphically, the game looks sweet, but the highlight for me is in the music, which sounds awesome. Remind me a little bit like Mega Man, especially the later 8-bit Mega Mans. Mega Men? Like Mega Man 9 or 10. Each stage has its own catchy tune, which got stuck in my head after just a few minutes playing the stage. There's even a secret password which you can find in the final stage that will take you to the jukebox mode. But with all the jokes aside, I do have a few actual little nitpicks, which some could actually be patched in this modern day and age, while others would be entire reworks or just like my opinion, man. But I did notice that there were some segments where I actually got hit when I respawned, like from this undead asshole. Well, that's hardly fair. Also, remember how I mentioned I'd bring up Shit Pickle again? I understand he's there as a consolation prize, so to speak. There to help you when you're struggling most and disappearing after you exit a screen. Well, for the most part, he absolutely trivializes bosses. I had a really hard time with the final boss, which is not a bad thing. You want the final boss to be hard. But when I was down to 1 life left, I beat the boss before it could even get to its second phase. It was done and dusted faster than you can say, "Shit Pickle picked a shitty pack of pickled shit." It was hilariously easy with this turbocharged turd. He not only keeps upgrading your weapon, but he also occasionally gives you health, so you'd have to screw up really bad to still end up losing. I never thought Shit Pickle would be the most useful item in the game. Just to reiterate though, Shit Pickle is not present in Hard as Balls mode, so I guess there's nothing stopping us from choosing Hard mode, or just not using him at all. Oh, so this is my fault now, is it? Speaking of Hard mode, the bosses themselves aren't anything different. They just deal a bit more damage and feel like they have twice as much health, which if you die and lose all your weapons and power-ups, which is gonna happen a lot, fighting each boss just feels like it goes on forever. I was kinda hoping that the bosses had new movesets, or acted a little differently or more aggressive during a second phase of some sort, but instead, it feels like it just artificially lengthens the fight, which does become a little stale. Finally, the only other nitpick that I can think of, especially when comparing to the previous AVGN games, is this one is rather short. You have 7 stages in total, with different parts and difficulty settings, which does mean replayability, but you have far less stages than in the second game, and no unlockable characters or anything like in the first game. I know not every game needs one, but it could have like a boss rush mode or something, a few little rewards for beating the game. But I also wonder if having the NES in mind meant that they had to think of limitations. But either way, it is a solid game with a reasonable price. Well, the NES version costs more. The box and instruction manual do look nice though. But with all that in mind, can I recommend this game to those who love watching the nerd and love retro style video games? I can, but if you're a fan of AVGN but not a fan of classic games, then this one might not be for you. But if you're a fan of classic games but not so much of the nerd, you might still enjoy this one. It's a solid game that's not unfair for newer players, even on medium, but challenging enough for seasoned vets to keep them interested. It does kind of feel like more of the same from the previous games, but I do think some of the level layout and challenges were fine-tuned and improved for this title, as it really does feel more like something Capcom or Konami would make, classic Konami I mean, and not something like from LJN. Laughing joking numbnuts. Overall, I really enjoyed this game, and I think it's definitely worth a play if you're curious, or want some more classic jump and shoot platforming action, with a side of poo jokes and gosh darn hex. It's short, but sweet, and for the most part, it feels like any mistake you do is your own fault, for the most part. Now if you excuse me, I'm gonna play some retro video games and have myself a beer. I don't have Rolling Rock, but I do have Stone and Wood. Cheers! Thank you so much for watching. What are your favorite modern retro style games? Do you have any that you would recommend? Are there any that are so bad or difficult that you'd rather have a buffalo take a diarrhea dump in your ear? Let me know in the comments. Also, let me know if you'd like me to cover older games on 8 and 16-bit consoles. If you like this video, please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe, and I shall see you all next time. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention, the pause music sounds straight out of Battletoads,